last tutorial we discussed allophones. We gave an example of the same three sounds in English, Korean and Thai to show how these languages vary phonemically, how in these three languages the phonemes and their allophones were grouped differently. We could also say that the allophonic rules are different in these three languages. Another example of a phonemic difference between two languages is with ul and the rhotic or R sound in English and in Japanese r. In English, these two sounds are separate phonemes. Law and raw, lot and rot are minimal pairs. But in Japanese, these two sounds are allophones of a single phoneme. If you look at these examples of Japanese words with these two sounds, you can see a pattern of where each particular allophone occurs. So we have lan, lika, lusu, lakishi, and loku. And then we also have nara, amari, sore, naru, and iro. You'll see that ul only occurs at the beginning of a word. R occurs in the middle of the word, never at the beginning. So in English, the two sounds divide up into phonemes like this. But in Japanese, they divide up into phonemes like this. Allophonic variation like this can be expressed as rules, or really principles. If you look again at the Japanese set of words, you can see that ul and r are allophones of a single phoneme. There are no minimal pairs, and each sound only occurs in a specific environment. They are in complementary distribution, or they don't occur in the same places. Now let's look at some similar data, a set of words from Korean. So let's look at the sounds ul and r in this data. Do they contrast, or are they in complementary distribution? If they are in complementary distribution, we need to write a rule describing that. Now if we check the data first for minimal pairs, we don't find any. So that means we don't have a contrast in the sounds. Now remember that if there are minimal pairs, that means the sounds distinguish meaning and are separate phonemes. These two sounds then are not separate phonemes. Now just notice here that this is just an example and the data is limited. If you were doing actual phonological analysis in a language, you would work with the whole language as a resource, not a restricted amount of data like this. Seeing we didn't find minimal pairs, we should now look for complementary environments. If we look at each word in the data, we can see that it doesn't matter what comes before these two sounds. Both always follow vowels. What does matter is what comes after the sound. If there is a vowel after it, this phoneme has the allophone r, but if there is a consonant after it, or if it is at the end of a word, that is, there's nothing after it, it has the allophone ul. So we've found a pattern in the way the two sounds work together, complementary distribution. We can express this complementary distribution by a rule. Phonological rules like this are written in a specific way. On the left is the phoneme ul in slashes. Slashes are used to go around phonemes. The arrows mean becomes or turns into or is pronounced as. Then the two allophones, r and ul, are in square brackets. Square brackets are used for phones or speech sounds. In phonology, they are used for allophones because allophones are just ways of pronouncing a phoneme. Then there is a slash, and what follows each slash is the environment for that allophone. So the first environment is an underscore with a V. So the line shows where the sound goes, and the V means vowel. So that environment means when the sound appears before a vowel. The second environment is elsewhere. This means that this allophone occurs in a few different other environments, anywhere except the specific environment where you get r before a vowel. Some other ways to write different environments are like this. So underscore C is when the sound appears before a consonant, and underscore hash is when the sound appears before a word boundary, so at the end of a word. You might wonder, for the rule we wrote for ul and r in Korean, why we didn't list both the environments where ul occurs rather than just saying elsewhere. So something like this. Now we don't list both of these because they have nothing in common. There's nothing specific about these environments that causes this allophone to occur in those places. It's just simply what you get when that phoneme is anywhere else than before a vowel. The rule we did list is specific. There's something about that environment that means it is where you will always get r. Whenever there are a few unrelated environments that we can't generalize about, like where the ul occurs, we simply say the environment for it is elsewhere. Let's take a step back and look at the big picture of why it might be helpful for us to understand language on this level. It is probably obvious to you that in developing a writing system for a language, phonology is important. We need to know which sounds in a language are phonemically significant because those will need a separate symbol in the orthography, the writing system, for people to be able to read their language. But an understanding of the principles of phonetics and phonology will also help to give you insight when you are learning to communicate in another language as well. Have you ever had the experience of trying to say a word or name in another language, and no matter how many times you repeat it, you think correctly, your friend repeats it back to you and makes you say it again and again because you're just not saying it right? But you can't hear any difference between how he is saying it and how you are saying it. What might be happening is that the sound you are messing up in his language is not phonemically distinct in English. In other words, it may be a sound that can be said in a variety of ways in English and it makes no difference to meaning, so an allophone of one phoneme, so you don't even notice it. But in his language, these same variations may be separate phonemes, so switching them actually changes the meaning. Your friend feels it is important for you to get it just right when you pronounce it, to make sure the aspiration is there or the nasalization or the lengthening, because to him, the sound you are saying is actually an entirely different sound, which indicates a different meaning. To him, it would sound like someone trying to say the English word worse and saying verse instead, or saying ship instead of sheep. So it is important for you to understand that it isn't just the sounds that are different in another language, but there will be differences in the way the language uses sounds to convey meaning. We have covered phonology in a simplified way because it actually gets quite complicated in practice. There are many different possible features of sounds like voicing, lengthening, nasalization that can potentially change phonemes in different environments. Our purpose in this course is to give you a basic idea of the way sounds work differently in different languages and to have a basic understanding of the procedure for phonological analysis, not to be a trained analyst. If you are required in the future to do phonological analysis on a language, you'll need to do further study on the full procedure, and there are many helpful resources available. Also, you can often find help from others, from linguists who have been or are working in that language or a related language or dialect. To give you an idea of what the procedure looks like in practice, we'll look at two examples involving vowel length. One example is more complex than the other. Now, as we go through these examples, don't worry if you don't understand everything. It will give you an idea of the types of things that can be encountered in phonological analysis and how the process looks. So, in Kikuyu, vowels can either be pronounced as long in duration or short in duration. So, in IPA, a long vowel is written with a colon following it, as you can see here in these words on the right. So, our question is, in Kikuyu, are the long vowels and short vowels allophones of the same or different phonemes? Our first step is to determine if there are minimal pairs for the long vowels and the short vowels. There are, as you can see, they're right across from each other. So we stop. We can conclude that in Kikuyu, long vowels and short vowels are allophones of different phonemes. In English, vowels are also pronounced as either long or short, as you can see from the data we have here. The row on the left has the longer vowels and the rest of them are short vowels. So our question is, in English, are the long vowels and short vowels allophones of the same or different phonemes? First, we need to determine if there are minimal pairs for the long vowels and the short vowels. It turns out that there are not any minimal pairs for any long and short vowels. So we go on to determine if there is a phonological rule that can relate the long and the short vowels to the same phoneme. Okay, now how do we find out if there is such a rule? The process is not cut and dried, but it can be broken down into 4 sub-steps. Our search is actually logical, and if we follow the steps, we'll get to the correct answer. We want to determine which of the following statements is true. Firstly, there's a rule that requires long vowels to be pronounced as short in some environment, or 2, there's a rule that requires short vowels to be pronounced as long in some environment. So, if 1 were true, then there would be some environment where we only find short vowels and no long vowels. If 2 were true, then there would be some environment where we only find long vowels and no short vowels. So just as an analogy, suppose there were 2 kinds of creatures, the brown octopus that sometimes turns blue and the blue octopus that sometimes turns brown. How could we tell if we had a brown octopus or a blue octopus? We could watch it for a while and see whether there's some particular occasion when it becomes blue, for example, when it's alarmed, or if there's some particular occasion when it becomes brown, for example, when it's defending itself. So if there is some occasion when it's always blue, then it's actually a brown octopus, but there is some rule that turns it into a blue octopus sometimes. If there's some occasion when it's always brown, then it's actually a blue octopus, but there is some rule that turns it brown in particular circumstances. So, getting back to our problem of long and short vowels in English, we want to see which of these is true. There is some environment where you only find short vowels, and if so, then there's a rule which turns long vowels into short vowels there. Or, there is some environment where you only find long vowels. If so, then there is a rule which turns short vowels into long vowels there. We're going to figure out which of these is true by following 4 steps. So firstly, determine the environments of the 2 phones, the short vowels and the long vowels. We want to make up 4 lists: the phones that precede a long vowel and the phones that follow a long vowel, the phones that precede a short vowel and the phones that follow a short vowel. So take a moment to look over this list here. The phones that precede a long vowel are the end of a word, t, and s. The phones that follow a long vowel are d, b, v, and v. The phones that precede a short vowel are the end of a word, t, s, and b. And the phones that follow a short vowel are t, p, and the end of a word. For each environment, look for any commonalities between the sounds in question. So we want to make up 4 lists. The similarities between phones preceding a long vowel and the similarities between phones following a long vowel. Similarities between phones preceding a short vowel and similarities between phones following a short vowel. And just note that no phones share anything in common with the hash, the end of the word. So from our data here, the phones that precede a long vowel, t, and s, have nothing in common. The phones that follow a long vowel, d, b, v, and v, are all voiced. The phones that precede a short vowel, t, s, and b, have nothing in common. And the phones that follow a short vowel, t, p, f, and the end of a word, also have nothing in common. So the The third step is to see if any of the environments are unique to a particular allophone. For each phone, long vowel or short vowel, look at those environments for sound X where the sounds share something in common. Check whether the corresponding environment for sound Y can have those properties, and if not, then that environment is unique to sound X. Then we see if any environments are unique to a particular allophone. So from our data, the phones that precede a long vowel, the end of a word, all, t and s, have nothing in common. The phones that follow a long vowel, d, b, v and v, are all voiced. The phones that precede a short vowel, the end of a word, all, t, s and b, have nothing in common. And the phones that follow a short vowel, t, p, f, and the end of a word, have nothing in common. So now look at the corresponding environments for the other phone. See if they can share those properties too. So the phones that follow a long vowel are all voiced, and the phones that follow a short vowel have nothing in common. So only long vowels can precede voiced consonants. The fourth step, if there is an environment unique to one phone, write out the rule that would limit that phone to that environment. Now, just as a rule of thumb, if there are two allophones, X and Y, and only X appears in environment Z, the rule is Y is pronounced as X in Z. So, our question is, in English, are the long vowels and short vowels allophones of the same or different phonemes? So the answer, they are allophones of the same phoneme, namely short vowels. The phonological rule that relates them is the following. In English, a short vowel is pronounced as a long vowel when preceding a voiced consonant. So just in summary, suppose you want to determine whether two phones, X and Y, in some language are allophones of the same or different phonemes. If there are not minimal pairs for X and Y, determine if there is a phonological rule that can relate X and Y to the same phoneme. Step 1, determine the environments of the two phones. Step 2, for each environment, look for any commonalities between the sounds in question. Step 3, see if any environments are unique to a particular allophone. And step 4, if there is an environment unique to one phone, write out the rule that would limit that phone to that environment.